everybody. Thank you for coming to celebrate this very special occasion. Some of you know Amy personally, some of you perhaps professionally through the amazing work that she's done. But I feel really lucky. I've had the privilege of knowing Amy since we started our counselling journey together some time ago, and it's been truly incredible to witness her passion and growth throughout this time. From combining her knowledge of counselling and neurodivergence to creating her own business and training and leading a team of neurodivergent therapists to support neurodivergent clients, she has continually worked to create space to make people feel heard, accepted and affirmed. And now, more recently, combining all of that, all of her experience and passion and knowledge into her latest book, Neurodivergent Affirming Therapy, which of course you are all here this evening to hear a little bit about. So it's my honour to introduce you to Amy Peters.
Hello, oh my goodness, I feel like I might cry after so much this. Yes, I'm super nervous. Welcome everyone, thank you so much for being here, and it's so lovely to have a mix of friends and a mix of colleagues and a mix of people from the community. Super lovely. No, absolutely thrilled. I want today really to be just a relaxed afternoon. As some of you have seen, there's the garden space if you want to head out there. There's the crafts out in the other room. If you need to head out for any reason, I know you've got to walk past me, but I promise I won't draw attention to you. Or you can head out the front if you need a breather or anything. I'm probably going to talk for about half an hour about the book, about 30 minutes. And also, so the copy I'm holding, I was just looking around for it then, it's this copy. This is a copy which is sort of going to be a keepsake for me, really, more than anything. But what I would really like with this is it's a book for people to scribble in the edges, for them to highlight passages they might like or resonate with them. So please, I'll leave this through there in a minute after I've finished. So if you'd like to, don't be afraid to write something, to draw something, whatever you fancy. And that will come with me to different trainings and talks that I do. And the idea is just to continue the conversation, really, as much as anything. So, yes, all that being said, and one other thing, I'm going to talk for half an hour, then we're going to have a break until about 6. And then come back for a Q&A, so if anyone can stay for that, if you'd like to ask any questions, I've got a little box there with some pieces of paper just to write your questions. And we'll finish up about 6:30, so if you can stay. Okay, so as you can tell, I am nervous, so please bear with me. I think the writing of the book, I really enjoyed the writing of the book, but seeing it in people's hands today is something else entirely. And seeing it on Amazon and seeing reviews and things like that, it's something completely different and it feels super vulnerable, as I'm sure you can imagine. So I thought I'd start with really just why I wrote the book. And I think the book started like lots of my ideas, kind of with a bit of a hyper focus to start with, and often they fizzle out. But this one seemed to stick. I think they start, loads of my ideas start with the kind of, they're a bit scattered, a bit half-baked. I have 147 tabs open on my computer and no real clear plan about what to do. But this somehow kind of made its way here after 2 years. And really what was happening to me in my professional life is I was noticing that neurodivergent clients that came to me and people that I spoke to had really difficult experiences within therapy and other settings. So neurodivergent people would go into therapy, into other settings, really wanting to connect with someone, really wanting that help and support, and coming away, actually in some cases, really being harmed, not through any intention, but just through lack of knowledge that the therapist might have had about autism and ADHD. So that's really sort of where it came from. And just to illustrate that, I'm going to read a very short section from the very beginning, chapter 1. So imagine this. A client sits across from you looking engaged and composed, but beneath the surface they've spent a lifetime feeling out of step with the world, constantly managing sensory overwhelm, struggling to keep up with unspoken social rules, and being told they're too much or too sensitive. In their previous therapy, the focus was often on fixing those struggles, tolerating discomfort, improving social skills, and learning to blend in. Each intervention subtly reinforces the same message. It's not okay to be yourself. To thrive, you need to become like everyone else. Ethan knows this experience all too well, and he said, a lot of sessions were framed around getting out of my comfort zone and not necessarily understanding the way my autism and ADHD affect me. I tried to fit into the neurotypical box that I knew I wouldn't be able to fit into. I would leave sessions regularly feeling that something was wrong with me because the sessions weren't making me feel any better. And his story is not unique. It was something that I was hearing again and again. So it made sense to me to put this together, really. And I think also at the moment there's so much talk about neurodivergence, specifically autism and ADHD. It's a bit of a hot topic. We're hearing it from politicians, we're hearing it in the news. Talk of overdiagnosis, the idea that there's an overdiagnosis at the moment of autism and ADHD, which I can say from my research and from everyone I speak to really isn't the case at all. But also we hear, I think there's a worry that too many people are jumping on the bandwagon, trying to claim benefits, those kind of things. This is the narrative that we're getting. And I think probably a lot of you who are working in this area as well, especially if you're working within therapy, but other settings as well, you're probably seeing more and more neurodivergent people, more and more people identifying themselves as neurodivergent coming into your practices. So, it sort of makes sense. So, how have we traditionally seen autism and ADHD? Well, we've seen it traditionally, historically, through a lens of disorder, a lens of deficit. And if any of you have read school assessments, reports, and diagnostic reports, diagnostic criteria, you'll see things like the phrases like social deficits, like rigid interests, lack of focus, failure to engage with others, lack of reciprocity, that kind of thing. But that kind of thinking is just a way of thinking. That's not fact. And there are alternatives, and many other cultures see neurodivergence completely differently. So, why do we have that kind of pervasive view? Well, we've got the medical model to thank for that. Now, the medical model is essentially a framework that conceptualises health and well-being in a certain way. And, its primary goal really is to diagnose, to fix, and to treat someone. For a broken arm, that's great, but for something as complex as our minds, for psychology and psychiatry, that's a lot less helpful, I think. And as a model, it assumes that there's one right way to be, one healthy way of being or expressing ourselves. So the medical model effectively frames autism and ADHD as disorders. Now, I see it differently. So why? Mainly because I'm a counsellor seeing neurodivergent clients. I run a team of therapists seeing neurodivergent clients. And also important to say here, and I obviously say it in the book, but neurodivergence is not just autism and ADHD. It's just that I, as an autistic and ADHD person, and also that's what I usually work with, that's what we're talking about today. But neurodivergence actually encompasses a whole load more than that. And really I see the profound impact of having the words to accurately describe yourself, what that can really do in this more compassionate way, using this more compassionate lens, really. Of course, it's never an easy ride. Therapy never is it? But this is where we need to have the correct words, the most accurate lens, appropriate lens to see our clients through, I think, in order to help them most effectively. So this is where there's something called the Neurodiversity Paradigm. That's where this comes in. The Neurodiversity Paradigm is effectively an alternative model to the medical model. And it moves away from a narrative of disorder to one of saying that neurodivergence is just a neutral term for a natural human variation. Natural variation in our human traits, essentially. So it's a way of understanding yourself without pathologising your very nature, which feels, for me, feels very apt and very aligned with what I see, my ethos as a counsellor and as a person too. So having been late diagnosed myself, so I was diagnosed late 30s and then early 40s, first ADHD, then autism. It's really not been easy, but it has completely changed my outlook on everything actually, and I've reframed everything from going back to when I was quite young through this new lens. And it's helped me enormously. And I've also seen it help my clients enormously too. And as I say, I think it feels more aligned with my ethos as a counsellor. Anyway, that we can exist as we are. We're not inherently flawed. So, alongside my work, I got my diagnosis, and as I say, I felt it was transformative when I could apply this approach. Neurodivergence explained so much for me. I felt misunderstood for years. I felt I was struggling to fit in, trying everything, coping strategies, everything that I could, and then this here felt like the answer for me. I needed that more compassionate approach to give me full permission to exist as I am, to find my authentic self. And that's something that I'd never have known without those new labels for myself. Now, we hear a lot about labels, I think, with this when we're talking about neurodivergence. And I think in terms of labels, when we don't have the language to explain ourselves properly, particularly when we're very young, we end up giving ourselves negative labels as a result. With the Neurodivergent Affirming Approach and what that is. Really, it's about having a knowledge of neurodivergent traits, but having that knowledge from the inside, from lived experience. That's so, so important. Traditionally, we've been taught this stuff through the eyes of the teachers, the professors, the academics, the doctors, from the outside. And this is what this is about. It's about learning from people's lived experience. It's also, neurodivergent affirming therapy is also about being able to help someone integrate their neurodivergent traits. Because for me, everything that happens to me happens through me. So I'm autistic and ADHD, so everything is filtered through an autistic ADHD mind. And it sounds obvious, but I think it's often missed actually. So just as an example of that for me, I think people that know me a while might say that I'm very organised. From the outside, I appear very organised. I'm not often late for things. I usually remember to reply to messages, usually. And I will know what day the non-uniform day is, all of those kind of things, generally. Now that's from the outside. But from the inside, what people don't see is the coping strategies I've had to put in place to get to that point. The stress that there is around trying to remember everything, because my working memory is not great. So therefore, I do things like I'll need to check my calendar 5 or 6 times in a day just to sort of be able to check which clients I've got, because I can't hold that all in my head. I just can't possibly do it. So I'll use those checks. I'll just get used to checking. Where's my phone all the time? Where's my keys all the time? And people don't see that. People don't see the anxiety that goes into it, So I think that's the point. It's that people are not seeing it often from the inside. So those are those invisible struggles that I talked about. So why is it important for counsellors and other people to use that approach? Well, as I said, it feels more aligned. I think for counsellors, we work holistically, we work in a humanistic way. This feels much more aligned than labelling someone with effectively a disorder, saying that they've got deficits, they're inherently flawed. This feels more aligned with what we do. And when we use it with our neurodivergent clients or students or friends or loved ones, we can help some of them reduce that deep shame they've been carrying, which often is lifelong as well. And it's often the explanation that they've needed. Okay, so I wanted to give a bit of an example of the sort of thing that you'll find in the book. A lot of the book is taking neurodivergent traits and reframing them with this more compassionate lens. So, you might know someone who talks a lot, maybe goes off on tangents, maybe jumps topics, maybe things all over the place when they're talking. Yes, I can see a few going those.
There you go.
And a few pointed looks at me as well, and yes, yeah, not untrue at all. So yeah, but the diagnostic criteria, so if we're talking about something like ADHD or maybe autism, diagnostic criteria based on that would say, they would have us believe that not turn-taking in conversation, that kind of interrupting that we often do, that not turn-taking is a deficit. That not picking up on cues when someone is ready to leave the conversation is a part of the disorder. It's framed in that way. It's a communication deficit, a social communication issue. But again, that's just an external view. It's how it affects others. And yeah, of course, somebody might get rude, they might think me rude, they might get fed up, they might think it unprofessional. Yeah, those things might happen. That's that outside view. But we can reframe this for a client, especially. It can be really powerful to do this. So hyperverbal communication is really, really common for autistic and ADHD people. And if we reframe through this compassionate lens, it's about far more than just wanting to talk. So a lot of us have an excitable nature. We're really passionate. We want to talk lots. We're excited to tell you everything. We're passionate about what we're doing. We might info dump, give you loads of information at once. Basically, what I'm doing now. And we're sharing our passions. It's a way of connecting. That's why we're doing it. The reason we might interrupt, for me at least, is a memory thing. So as I said, my working memory is not great. So if I've got some brilliant thing to say, I'm going to be like, come on, get to the end of your sentence, because I want to jump in, because I'm excited, and also because I don't want to forget it, right? So it's a memory issue. We might like to talk because the jaw is a really big muscle in our mouth, right? So in our body. So actually, that kind of self-soothing can happen just by talking, which I'm hoping is helping me now. But yeah, or like me, you might process things verbally. So I need to say things out loud, and I do just to myself at home, but I need to say things out loud for them to make sense. So we're just giving context here, aren't we? And also, we might have a history of being misunderstood. That is so, so common. And sharing lots of ourselves is the way to connect with others, to finally be heard, to give others context, so we will finally be understood this time, maybe. So that's the kind of reframing we can do, and it helps us understand that actual experience. And to see that as just a communication difference. And I'm sure there are lots of neurodivergent people in the room today, and I'm sure a lot of people will testify. You put two neurodivergent people in a room together, they will ping off each other, they'll be energised by the conversation, they'll go on the same tangents, and it will be amazing. There's no communication deficit there at all. It's just when we have maybe a mix of neurotypes, that might highlight the difference. So that's all we're talking about, is the communication difference, really. So in the therapy room then, we can use that reframe because we can reflect that back to the client. We might ask them about their preferred means of communication. We might ask who they can best communicate with, who they feel safest with, what they need from others in life, and also from you as a therapist. What do they need from you in your communication? And also we can normalise this. Now in traditional therapy, especially the traditional therapy models, often it's framed, like if somebody is maybe going on tangents or talking around in circles, it's often framed as avoidance, actually, avoidance of the discomfort, avoidance of that difficult topic. But actually, we can reframe it in this way. You as the therapist might be the first person that's ever properly given space to someone for them to be able to do this. You can witness their processing. And that's incredibly valuable, right? You can imagine. So that's just one example, and I reframe quite a lot of others in the book as well. So I think you can imagine how powerful that could be if you can bring that into the room with people. We can help understand their experience properly. I'm going to take a sip of drink quickly. Okay. So I also talk a lot about language in the book. I do think it's incredibly important. A lot of us here are in roles of responsibility as professionals, but even as a friend or family member, words really matter. So when they come from an uninformed place, they can be harmful, and it's really important for us to be confident in this stuff. And just to illustrate that, just for a minute, I want you to imagine that you've thought to yourself you might be autistic. You've gone and you've watched a load of TikTok videos or Instagram reels, you've read loads of books, you've talked to people, you've started to figure out, yeah, I think this might be me. You've decided to go for an assessment. You maybe have waited 3 or 4 years for that assessment, or maybe you've paid a lot of money to get a private assessment, and you're at the point you get your diagnosis. Okay, you're autistic. And then you decide, okay, I'm going to tell one person. And you might choose your therapist, you might choose a friend, you might choose a family member, a teacher. And then as you're waiting, you can say to them, I'm autistic, you're waiting for their reply, and they say, oh, well, we're all on the spectrum, aren't we? Or, oh, you don't look autistic. I would never have known. Which essentially what you're saying there is, well done for masking and hiding, carry on pretending to be someone else. Or people will say, why would you want to label yourself like that? Why would you want to put a label on yourself? And I just want you to think about how that might feel. And I suspect a few of us here have heard those things as well. And what's the impact of those comments? They're not intentionally harmful and probably generally they come from a good place. They're sort of like, oh, we're all in this together, oh, we're all a bit on the spectrum, aren't we? Well, but they're far from it. They're far from helpful because they're actually dismissing that person's experience of being autistic, that person's long potential struggle to get to where they are with that diagnosis. And also, it's not true. We're not all on the spectrum. There's no look to being autistic. And as we spoke about labels earlier, these are important labels for people, important information. So instead of getting curious, that comment from that other person that you've decided to share this with has just shut down all communication and all connection, really. So they're just a few examples. I've sadly heard those many times and from many people, many different types of professionals, teachers, counsellors across the board. So that's why it's important, as I say, to help you feel more confident, hopefully. That's why bringing language into the book. And I also think here it's important to say that we might feel shame as well around maybe we've said those things before, maybe we've thought those things before. And that's okay, we're learning. That's what we're here for. We're learning, but it's up to us to get a bit uncomfortable sometimes and to unlearn those biases and do this work, in order to not do further harm, essentially. Okay, so as perhaps you can probably see, the neurodivergent affirming approach isn't just a tick box exercise. It's not just putting a few fidget toys out, having some adjustable lighting. It has to be across the board. It's not enough to say, we're neurodiversity affirming, and then send 6 emails with for an intake when you're onboarding a client. 6 emails all at once, and that's a true story. It happened to a friend of mine. They'd had an intro call with their counsellor, and it was great, and they were saying, oh, they're going to adapt therapy for me, and they're going to do this, and so on. And then, immediately a flurry of 6 emails got sent through with GDPR things, with things to sign, with things to read. Totally overwhelming for someone that reached out because they were overwhelmed and burnt out. And that's just an illustration of how these things are easily missed. So it needs to be across the board. It has to be a culture embedded into all of our work. And that obviously requires real change and constant reflection. And my hope is the book helps you work through all this. To be confident, doing that unlearning, doing the reflection and putting into practice some of the practical strategies as well. And just to say also at the end of each chapter, I put a section in which is called For the Neurodivergent Therapist. And that was very intentional because for so long I think we've been left out of the conversation. Neurodivergent people have been left out of the conversation. So it felt incredibly important for me to put that in. And the whole book is about lived experience. It centres that lived experience from me, from clients, and from other neurodivergent people as well. And I felt that was incredibly important. Earlier. I did try and memorise some of this, but it was never ever going to happen. Ever. So there we go. Just to mention then that the writing of the book itself felt obviously like it's no mean feat. I think, especially for someone who's ADHD, I wanted to go off on all those tangents. I wanted to put in everything, including the kitchen sink, into here. Literally, that was the hardest thing, deciding what to leave out. I was slow at reading and research. I hated editing with a passion, the editing process. I didn't do things the typical way, and I very much didn't want this to be just a textbook. And it started out with me thinking, how could I put my work into the book? How can I explain the knowledge I've gained? And that all kind of felt very safe. I could write that way, to write the book that I needed when I came out of training. But there was a point that it was was really obvious that the book needed to be more than just my therapy work on the page. As I wrote, I realised more and more of me was creeping into the book, which was super scary. But I think maybe that was what was needed, because I know for me, when I read a book, I read it so much easier when I can hear the author's voice and really connect with them. And I really hope you can read mine in this, you can hear mine in this and feel the passion too. And lastly, I just have to take a moment to say thank you to a few people. So firstly, thank you so much to my friends for helping me today and coming so far as well. Thank you, I'm so grateful. But more importantly, I think, for helping me shape this book from the so many conversations that we've had over the years. And it's also been an absolute privilege to witness your journeys alongside mine. And I'm tearing up now because it's like, honestly, it's such a privilege. Obviously to Chris as well, who's helping out today and has been selling books and so on. And I really appreciate his ability to let me just talk. And the processing things verbally is something that I only realised recently that I needed to do, and he allows me to do that, so thank you. And I think especially someone not in the therapy business, it's actually really helpful to bounce ideas off of. And obviously thank you for the dishwasher stuff. He doesn't know it's a permanent arrangement yet. So my publishers at JKP, when they write the book, they suggest you always write the introduction last, when you actually know what's in the book, before you introduce it. Sensible advice, which naturally I ignored. So I wrote the introduction first, and then as I sort of neared completion of the book, I went back and I had a look and tried to decide what I wanted to leave in there. And I realised it did need something else. I wasn't sure what. I'd explain how the book came about, the context, the need for it, but like I said, I didn't want it to be just another textbook. So I realised I needed to put even more of me into it. So in a bit of a vulnerable moment, I wrote this. And in true upside down fashion, neurodivergent fashion, at the very end of my talk, I'm basically reading like the first bit of the book. If I can find it. There we go. Okay. I get goosebumps when I speak a truth that matters. Not every time, only when a thought lands with that quiet, unmistakable weight in the body. A visceral signal, this is for you. Since discovering neurodivergence in myself, in others, and in the therapy space itself, I've felt that sensation much more often. It doesn't show up on demand, but when it does, I trust it. It's become a kind of sensory compass, pointing me towards what's real, what's missing, what's aching to be voiced. That feeling guided me as I wrote the book, not because the ideas here are radical, but because they're rarely spoken. Not in training rooms, not in counselling rooms, not in supervision. Therapy wasn't built for neurodivergent people. And this book is the result of sitting with that truth, following the goosebumps and refusing to look away. And I didn't just write this book for others, I needed to hear these messages myself. And I had goosebumps when I wrote that. I had goosebumps when I shared it with people to check how it sounded. And I can absolutely confirm I had goosebumps when reading it to you. And so that's how I know I'm in the right place. So thank you for joining me today.